Hey guys, so in my last video I told you I had a boost leak on a couple of my intake manifold gaskets. So I just want to I'm going to put some compressed air into the system and just show you exactly what it sounds like. This is the boost leak tester that I bought. I got it from boostleaktesters.com. It was about 30 bucks, but you guys can build one of these yourself for probably $10 to $15 in parts. I just didn't feel like piecing it together, so I went ahead and bought it. But basically I'm going to put it on this charge pipe down here. It's going to go onto this charge pipe right here. You could piece together your own kit to actually do a complete boost leak test from the actual turbos all the way to the intake manifold, but I went ahead and replaced both of these. There's two flange gaskets down here, and the other flange gasket over here is all new. So really, I'm just omitting, by doing it right here, I'm omitting those three gaskets. The gasket there, the two here, and this pipe. I know this pipe's tight, so I'm not going to take all the recirculation valve pipes off and plug them up and disconnect the MAFs, plug up the turbo inlet down there, and go through all that. It's just not worth it because I'm pretty confident that this area right here is fine. So you need a, this is a 3¼ inch coupler. It slides over this, tighten it down, and I'm just going to put 10 PSI on this system, or into the system. I am currently running 17 PSI, so I'll bump it up to about 15 just so you guys can hear the leak, but it's pretty bad, so I'll go ahead and do that now. Alright, so I have the regulator on my compressor. It's 12 PSI, it's close enough, but I'm going to connect it and you guys can hear the boost leak. Still building here, it's about 3 right now. It's at 5 PSI, you can already hear it. I wanted to run about 1.4, 1.5 bar, but I didn't because I'm still on paper intake manifold gaskets and I feared that those would blow, but 1.1 bar I guess was enough to pop them. When I stick my hand in there, both number 1 and number 2 are leaking. Right now it's at 10 PSI and you guys can hear it, so just imagine what it's at 1.1 bar, about 16, 17 PSI. So yeah, basically this video is just going to show you all the steps required to remove the intake manifold. So if you read about this procedure online, a lot of people say it'll take you 4 to 6 hours, and some people say it takes 30 minutes. I'm basically going to be following the actual Nissan shop manual steps. It does want you to drain the coolant. I'm just going to drain half of my coolant, enough to get it below the surface of the head here. So when I remove the intake manifold, the cooling lines that run into the intake manifold shouldn't leak that much coolant since the level will actually be below the head. The gaskets I'm using are HKS, they're metal intake gaskets. They're about 55, 60 bucks, so those should be able to withstand 1.5, 1.4, whatever you're going to be running all day long. So it comes with 6 of these gaskets right here. They're for this area. There's 3 here. Let's see if I can zoom in on that. 3 here, 3 here, and then this gasket is actually for once you take off this area, it's going to sit right in this area right here. So yeah, let's get started. The shop manual, I already did this step right here to relieve fuel pressure. So remove your fuel pump fuse, start the car, and then crank it over a few more times to make sure there's no fuel pressure in your system. Drain the coolant a little bit. I seriously don't think you need to drain the whole thing like I said. Then you're going to remove the throttle cable linkage, and you're going to disconnect the linkages right here like it states. Just like the manual states, these linkages you're going to disconnect right here. Be sure not to disconnect this area right here. You're going to have a rigging issue when you put them back together. Disconnecting it from right here, you won't have to re-rig it. So you'll have these two, and then the one back there for the other linkage, for the other pair of blades. I'm going to disconnect this right here, and then disconnect the throttle cable, move that out of the way. See, I have a boost solenoid I have to move, and then I have my oil filter relocation kit I need to disconnect and pull that out of the way. You're going to need to remove this charge pipe right here, and it wants you to disconnect these fuel lines because all that'll be coming out. There's 3 hoses back here that are connected to the manifold. You're going to have the brake booster line, and then the actual air chamber that has the idle air control valve underneath. There's 3 bolts that attach that whole assembly to this plenum. So you're supposed to just get under there, loosen them, pull them out. So as you can see, I got the throttle linkage disconnected. So this TPS over here, there's a clip on it. I don't know if you guys can see it. Well, basically you need to try to get a scribe or something with a fine tip, get in there, you're gonna have to pry it out, but be careful because that clip will fly off and you'll never find it. And then once you have the TPS disconnected, just simply slide that out and this is off. Well, I got some more light over here so you guys can hopefully see what I'm working with. So those are the intake manifold gaskets that are leaking right here. Like I said, you have 3 here, and then right behind the throttle bodies you have 3 more of those. And then that long gasket's gonna go on the back here where all this assembly mounts to the head. So there's your idle air control valve. Oh, can you guys see it? I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but there's a couple hoses right there that gotta come off. The air chamber assembly that's mounted to the underside. And then this fuel tube right here has 3, the manual says there's 3 bolts holding it to the underside of the manifold too. So right now I'm gonna try to get all those disconnected. This is the brake booster hose you gotta disconnect. These are your connections for the TPS I just removed. There's a nut right there for the clutch master, or the clutch booster. That's gotta come off. And hopefully once I have all those disconnected, everything has been removed from the manifold, I can start to remove these 12 nuts right here. Some people say you need an extension or a 1/4 inch drive with a wobble extension. I have one I'm gonna try. And also a swivel, a 12mm. If you guys can get you one of these, apparently these are really helpful for this job too. All right, so this is the fuel tube assembly right here. And there's one of the bolts, but basically there's one there, and there's one right there, and there's another one right over here. So once those are out, that's loose. Now you have the air chamber assembly. I don't know if you guys can see the one bolt, the bottom of it right there, but there's 2 more. So I gotta get in there and then that'll just separate off the actual plenum itself. And just to give you guys an idea of what I just did, like I said, pause it if you want to read this manual. But basically there's the fuel tube, there's your air chamber, tells you which hoses to remove. There's the 3 hoses right there. This is the air chamber, that's the idle air control valve, that'll actually come down with it. There's one of the bolts. Booster vacuum hose, and then obviously the air chamber again, and then it gets on to the how to remove the actual plenum in a certain order. Also, I'm just going to go ahead right now and disconnect these fuel lines from the actual rail, and that whole tube assembly that I just disconnected should all come out as one piece. This is my fuel pressure sending unit. I'm going to take all that out because I need as much access as I can to the underneath of this. I'm getting fucking high off these gas fumes. You guys could probably cut these fuel lines if you wanted to and replace them if yours are 25 years old. My return line down here is the original one. The pressure one isn't, and the return one I'm having a hard time getting off right now, so I think I'm just going to cut it because I'm going to replace it anyways. Alright, here's your fuel tube assembly. There's your 3 bolts right there, 1, 2, 3. Oh, be sure you guys get some wrap or bags and some zip ties and cap off all these lines. So I have the fuel filter to cap off, and then I'm just going to put a bag around these. You just don't want any dirt or anything getting in there, obviously. So I got 2 of the bolts out for this AAC valve, the idle air control valve. However, there's one over here on the bottom. I can't get to it because the oil pressure sending unit is down there. I'm not taking that off. So the only way around it is to remove the idle air control valve completely. It looks like 3 10mm bolts. The only shitty part about that is now I gotta go buy a gasket and wait for it to get here. But I don't see a way around it. I can't get access from the bottom because the differential's down there, the front differential. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove the AAC valve, and hopefully that'll give me access to that back bolt for that air chamber to get it off the plenum. So yeah, way easier to get to the other bolt. Just use your spanner wrench on it because you can't get a ratchet in there. I don't know if you guys can see what I'm doing, but this is a pry bar, and I have it in between. I have it right on top of these pipes that are in the back here, these rubber hoses, and I already took the clip off, so I have it on top of the hose, right? I'm just bopping them until they come off. So everything is pretty much disconnected as far as I can see. So I'm going to start removing these 12 bolts like the manual wants me to. So I'm about an hour and 15 minutes into this. 15 of those minutes were spent looking for tools that I keep fucking losing. Anyways, so this back nut in the very back corner on cylinder number 6, the bottom one, that is what I used. When I got on the nut and just turned it, I had to do that about 3 times. Anyways, it's loose. Oh, you gotta have skill to do this. And there she goes. I still gotta get the washer and the lock washer off of that, but that apparently is the hardest one out of the 12 that you have on here. So cylinder number 4 in my mind was harder than number 6 in regards to the bottom nut. So that bottom nut I had to use a 1/4 inch drive with a swivel joint on the end there. That's the only nut I had to use this tool. All the rest have been able to use just normal extensions on 3/8 drives. Alright, I lied. The hardest part was this tube, there's a nut in here. Can you guys see my finger? Okay, on the underside of this. Extremely difficult to get to. That alone took me about 20 minutes. So as you can see, let me get rid of this for a second. The manifold's loose. It's ready to come off. However, this brake booster hose back here, right there, it's hitting. So I'm gonna have to remove that. It looks like a 10mm bolt. And then on the back wall, a 12mm nut. And hopefully I can move that small bracket that's attached to the clutch master cylinder. All right, so after a bit of prying, pushing this hose down, getting that nut out, I'm gonna have to kind of shimmy it out, but it is out. There's location dowels in here. Make sure, well, they feel pretty embedded in there, but still, you don't want to lose those. Oh, yes. So you will have location dowels in all 6 of the bottom. See, I'm missing 2, but there's one right here and there's one on the 6 cylinder in the back, so good there. Double check that. And also, this is where all that crap was mounted underneath. And that was that difficult cylinder number 5, that nut right there. That is for this tube. But yeah, I'll let you guys get a view of this. You can see all the crap that's down here. That is that AAC, the idle air control chamber. So this whole assembly will come off once I start removing these throttle bodies, but there's bolts in the back to get all that off. But it's probably a good idea for you guys to check over your hoses. There's some heater hoses down here. Maybe even replace them because they are old. I'm not going to. I really don't think this job was as big as people make it out to be. Turbo swap was way more difficult. So you have the 3 throttle body assemblies here. The front one's going to has an air hose on it right here. I went ahead and cut it because, as I said earlier, it's an old hose. These are new, but this hose right here isn't. So I went ahead and cut it because this is going to be easier to remove. And these will slide out just like so. It's pretty hard to mix these up. I don't think you can, to be honest with you. I guess you could interchange these, but I would just go ahead and number them. Put a little permanent marker on here, just 1, 2, 3, so you know which one goes where. Oh, by the way, can you guys see that? That was my problem on the number 1 cylinder. That is not from me removing it. That is split, because you can clearly see seepage right there from fuel and all that other good stuff. So there's my problem, and you can see down here too where it was leaking. Go ahead and remove these. It's number 2. Remember about those location dowels. You don't want those to come off and go missing. Alright, I guess so for this back throttle body assembly. See how I'm hitting this? This is a hose for the brake booster. So instead of removing this pipe assembly, and I actually don't know, I don't think I have that gasket. The gasket that I have doesn't, the holes aren't lining up, so I don't actually want to take that off. So what I'm going to do is I have 2 nuts on these 4 threaded rods right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just put 2 nuts on there, tighten them down, and just remove them. That's going to be the best bet. That way it'll just all come out straight up and out. Another thing I want to point out is these throttle bodies have a special coating on the inside right here. You can probably see it better over here from, see all the black stuff in there? I mean, yeah, the majority of that is soot, but you do not want to use throttle body cleaner and clean this gunk out, or you will have idle issues, because there's actually a special sealant that Nissan puts on there to help seal these blades when they're completely closed, so the idle air control valve can do its job. So if you start spraying throttle body cleaner in there, you will increase the gap between the blade and the actual housing, and you're going to let more air in there. Therefore, your idle air control valve isn't going to work properly, and you're going to have a high idle. So do not clean these. I'm not going to clean these at all. They're going to go right back on the way they are. I will have to disconnect the fuel injectors up here, pull that harness off the way, and then you're going to have to start removing these bolts right here all the way across, and this all hopefully will come out as an assembly. Here's the shop manual for it. So there's your air balance tube. Those are the tubes that feed the air chamber for the idle air control. There's that other assembly. I'm going to disconnect this hose and take that out, okay, like I said, and then I should be able to remove this whole assembly, including this air chamber tube, balance tube, whatever it is, up here. Already got the injectors disconnected. Like I said, you have to drain coolant because the housing, just disconnect the hose from it. That'll all come out with this assembly right here. Alright, there's some ground wires right here, and then you have I believe that's a temp sensor, and then that might be like an over temp lamp, something like that, I don't know. But anyways, that needs to come off. And then I just move the harness out of the way. And one thing I noticed is there's see the tube connected to the plenum. Let's see if I can get in here. Oh no! The guy on the bottom right there. Anyways, there's a small line right there. Once that line's off, just need to pick up this air chamber a little bit down here, and this should come out. Because the only thing that it's riding on right now are these 3 threaded rods right here. 1, 2, and then the one in the back. So that little guy in the back is a coolant line. So since that one's going to be easy to replace while it's off, I'm definitely going to go ahead and swap that one out. Alright, so there's a hose back there. See the nipple? I had to pry it off. Could not access the clamp. So you literally have to just pry it off. It comes off really easy, at least it did for me. I did have to remove my fuel injector rail because the rail was hitting the clutch line over here. And what else did I have to do? You have to disconnect. There's a bolt right here. It's for all these lines, because you need a couple millimeters to push down on this so it clears over here. You guys will see what I'm talking about, but alright. Finally. God, that was such a pain in the ass. And again with the centering dowels, whatever your centering pins, whatever you want to call them, there was one here. It's actually in the assembly over there, and then the other one's right here. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to tell if the gasket back here was the culprit, but so this was the hardest part, was removing this back assembly right here. I'm going to go over some of these vacuum lines, take a look at them. I'll probably replace a few. These are all coolant lines down here. Oh, coolant line, coolant line, coolant line, coolant line, coolant line, coolant line, vacuum, vacuum. So just go over yours. If you think you need to replace them, if they're looking brittle, just do it now, because you do not want to do this again. For reinstallation of that intake manifold portion, I would remove this threaded rod right here. It'll make installation way easier, because this is pretty far. So actually, that whole assembly is going to be out here. Versus if you just take that off, you only got to work with these 2 pins right here, which are half the length of this. Just remember where this goes, because it's here for a reason. So this is your center bolt. This is where your center bolt goes. So just remember, it's the bottom left. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that now, and I'll put it back in on installation. With these 2 right here, it'll hold the gasket in place So this doesn't, you can remove this without any problems. This stuff in the UK is apparently really good. It's Hylamar Universal Joining Compound. It's similar to the stuff that you can get in the United States. I forget the name of the company, but it's a copper spray gasket. Pyrotex, whatever it's called. I don't know the exact name, but this stuff's just as good. Just spray it on and let it sit for at least 10 minutes before you put it on. And the directions state that to actually retighten the bolts after a few minutes. So what I'll do is I'll torque them all down, wait 10-15 minutes, and then go back and torque them again. I don't think I'm going to get any more turns out of them. But I would not put these gaskets on bare. I would definitely spray something on them. Spray that copper spray gasket or get a can of this stuff. This was 20 bucks, but it apparently is really good stuff. I'm going to go ahead and I already cleaned up the surfaces for this gasket here. I'm going to go ahead and clean up all the surfaces right here. And the same thing with this plenum right here. See how this came out as an assembly? I'm not going to separate it because, like the manual states, you have you got to put sealant here, here, and here. And I believe this is the air chamber balance tube. And I believe there's either gaskets or sealant up here. I didn't take any of that off. I'm not going to. Also, this blue hose that you see right here is my deck can that I told you guys I was going to mount. I have it mounted in the upper portion of the block, which is where it needs to be. So I'll be using this for tuning purposes. Alright, so I got some new fuel hose I'm going to be putting on. There's your return line. There's your pressure line. So there's a small, about 4 inches right here that'll go into the bottom of the fuel filter, and then the line going from the fuel filter to the fuel tube, and then from the fuel tube to return. Then you have your 2 fuel lines right here in this area that near the fuel pressure regulator. I'm going to be replacing with new line. The line you need, the size is 5/16 or 8mm, whatever country you're in will be dependent on that. And then as you can see, I cleaned up all the surfaces. That took about 45 minutes alone to get all the gasket off the throttle bodies. Just take your time, don't gouge the surface, because you put a decent gouge in it, they'll leak. So what I'm gonna do is gonna put this gasket on right here for the back portion of the plenum. Remember earlier I told you guys to remove this, so I'm gonna take that out so this back plenum goes in a lot easier. I won't have to put it in starting from way back here. I can just put it on from right here and then back. And then yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and torque that down per the manual. This is the steps for it. Like I said, pause, there's your numbers, there's your tightening sequence. It tells you to do it in gradual steps. And your torque is only 12 to 15 foot-pounds. So I'll probably do an initial setting of 5 foot-pounds just to set it. And then I'll go ahead and do in sequence to 15 foot-pounds. Alright, so I'm gonna start with this metal gasket. This gasket only goes on one way, so you can't mess it up. And like I said, this is already treated with that Hylamar gasket and sealant spray. Also double check you have all your centering pins in there. It looks like there's only 2, and they're mounted in the head right now. Yeah, there's only 2 for this portion. Don't forget there's this plug onto this valve down here too. I'll get that here in a minute. Just hung up on some vacuum lines. Then don't forget this coolant line back here. That'll be fun to put back on. And then for this stud, just tighten 2 nuts down and thread that back in there. Make sure you don't have any lines running underneath that are going to get pinched. This front differential vent line was actually wedged underneath this. So if I would have bolted this down, I would have never got it out. So always make sure that you're not trapping vacuum lines or brackets or anything like that underneath before you start torquing this down, because I don't think these gaskets are reusable. And even if they are, I wouldn't feel comfortable reusing them once it's torqued down properly. So I got that coolant line connected on the back. That hose connected. I'm going to start connecting everything to the air chamber. These 2 vacuum lines. I'm not going to put the AAC valve back on just yet, because I'll have problems getting to this back bolt right here. So once this chamber is mounted back to the plenum, I'll install the AAC valve. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and start torquing these down. So one thing I want to point out to you guys, there's 3 different lengths of bolts that go into this back plenum. the plenum that mounts to the cylinder head. They're all stated right here, and they tell you what numbers go where. So keep that in mind. It's not, I mean, it's difficult to get that one mixed up, but these two right here, they're almost similar, so there's an obvious difference in length there, so just keep that in mind when you're putting that back together. Alright, so I have an inch-pound torque wrench set to 60 inch-pounds, which equates to 5 foot-pounds, so that's what I'm going to do for the initial torque setting. So I'm going to go ahead with that, and then I'll go back over them again in sequence at 15 foot-pounds. Alright, the back portion of the manifold is torqued down. Remember, like I stated earlier, you want to wait 10 minutes for that sealant to set and then go back over. The majority of the inners, I actually got a eighth of a turn on. So remember to let it set and then recheck your torque settings. I'm going to go ahead and hold off on the injectors right now because it gives me more room up here with them off, and I'm going to start to put on the throttle bodies. Just remember, you have all your location dowels in here. I have all 6. They only go on the bottom portion. So what I'll do is I'll put the 3 gaskets on, and then I'm going to slide the throttle body assemblies on right now. Alright, so I have all the throttle bodies on. The gaskets are all on. All the centering dowels, the 6 on the bottom again, are all in. So this is the last time for you to go over all your work and make sure you have all your hoses connected to this air chamber. You have the plug on this valve back here connected. That hose that's attached to that valve, make sure that's connected back there. And just go over everything. If you have any hoses you need to replace and you haven't, you need to do it now because the plenum's about to go back on, and that's it. So I'm going to try to wiggle this thing in place. Oh, I do have the 2 studs in the bottom on this first throttle body over here, but I have them off on the top. And if you need to bend this, and that is it. She is in. So I'll start by connecting some of these hoses down here underneath the plenum and bolting it up, the air chamber, putting the idle air control valve on, and the fuel rail. Here's the tightening sequence for the plenum. And again, 15 foot-pound. So it wants you to do it on the black plenum uniformly in 2 to 3 stages. So I'll do 5, 10, and then 15 foot-pounds as a final. So one thing I want to point out is when you guys fill your coolant, don't forget to remove this bleeder. So I started filling my coolant, it was actually full over here. And when I took this off, a large gust of air came out, followed by fluid. So very important you guys take that off. So the good news is everything's installed, everything's torqued down. There's currently about 12 psi on the system right now, and the intake manifold gasket is not leaking. However, can you guys hear it? This thing's leaking, the PCV valve. So I'm going to try to take it apart and clean it. If not, I'll order a new one. So I have a small leak there, not a big deal, I'll get it fixed. And I think this T is cracked because it's slightly hissing over here too. But other than that, it's not leaking anywhere near as bad as what it did before. So I'm very happy that I don't have to be taking it apart. I still have to install the fuel line and connect the oil filter and all the other good stuff back up. Throttle cable, injectors, plug them all in. So that pretty much concludes the video. I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, take care of the PCV issue. If this video helped you guys, please comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button for me. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Take care.